Behold, one of the most iconic artworks from Victorian England. You might be seeing this canvas for the first time, but for many in Britain, it's as familiar as Teddy Bear's Picnic or The Ninth Wave are to us. We observe a weary elder, clad in somber black, his frame hunched over a polished wooden table. A gentle hand, belonging to a younger woman, rests tenderly upon his. Is she his daughter, or perhaps his granddaughter? She reads from a substantial volume open on her lap. In the corner of the room, to her right and behind her, stand banners. Adorning the wall is a formal portrait of an officer, and through the window, a maritime vista unfolds, complete with a sailing vessel. As you delve deeper into the painting, finer details emerge. His face bears the marks of a hard life, etched deeply into his features and his entire posture. Observe the stubborn clench of his fists. The table he leans upon is covered by a map, and if you look closely, you'll notice it's incomplete. At the coastline abruptly terminates to the north, dissolving into emptiness. Shift your gaze to the lower left quadrant, and you'll find more books leaning against the table, similar to the one the young woman is reading. These are ship's logs. The granddaughter is reading passages from her grandfather's own logs to him. Here we see an old mariner who spent his entire life striving to complete a map of the world in service to the glory of the British Empire. The painting is titled The Northwest Passage, or perhaps It Can Be Done and England Must Do It. This masterpiece by John Everett Millais was created in 1874. By this time, Britain had been grappling for centuries with a challenge that, to this day, is only partially resolved. Countless resources, vessels, and human lives had already been expended in pursuit of its solution. The quest was for a navigable route from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean along the northern coast of Canada, the Northwest Passage. As you know, Columbus sailed west across the ocean, seeking an alternative path to India, China, and the Spice Islands. The realization that the Earth was not flat but spherical offered hope of discovering a new, shorter route to the east, one not yet guarded by rivals. Unfortunately, it soon became evident that a vast continent, America, lay directly in the path to the coveted Asia, stretching across the globe and blocking the way. Remember, the Panama Canal was not even a dream at this point. Naturally, this did not deter anyone, and from 1520 onward, Europeans began to circumnavigate both Americas from the south to reach the Pacific. In principle, the dream of reaching China from Europe without sailing around Africa or traversing all of Eurasia was achieved. You could sail from London to Canton around America. But good heavens, how incredibly long that journey was. Attempts were also made to cut across the Isthmus of Panama, the narrowest point. If you haven't yet seen my video on the Panama Canal, let me simply tell you it was a very, very poor idea. Consequently, sailing around the north of America, along the coast of what would later become Canada, seemed like the most direct and shortest route. So, what if it was there, that nagging obsession of all of Europe? If only they could find a passage through the labyrinth of northern islands, the shortest road to Asia would be theirs. And while they were at it, they could establish ports and trading posts along the maritime route, engage with the native peoples, Inuit, and conquer the Arctic. The task seemed clear and achievable. Here lies the Atlantic Ocean, and there lies the Pacific. Between them, a multitude of islands. A rather large and direct strait is clearly visible between them, and not just one. Suppose it took some time to explore and map this region, and after a certain amount of effort, it could be found. The problem, to paraphrase Millais, was it can be done, and England must do it. This is essentially how navigators and administrators from the 17th to the 19th century envisioned the task, dispatching expeditions to regions that would soon become their watery graves. In a similar vein, the Northwest Passage would bury the hopes, pride, fortunes, and souls of many brave souls. Before we delve into specific attempts to find the Northwest Passage, let's briefly consider why it proved such an intractable problem. Firstly, the territory, even setting aside the ice for a moment, we'll add it back shortly, is a labyrinth of islands and peninsulas with an extremely jagged coastline. When you cannot view the terrain from above via satellite or even an airplane, the only way to find the correct passage within the labyrinth is through repeated attempts, which is precisely what the Europeans intended to do. The very necessity of multiple attempts, most of which would likely end in failure, did not deter them. And if this were happening in temperate or tropical latitudes, a labyrinth of islands would indeed not be an issue. However, this entire region lies beyond the Arctic Circle. The Arctic Circle is where the polar nights begin, and the average temperature does not exceed 10 degrees Celsius, meaning virtually nothing grows there, and consequently, virtually no one lives there. Even if you didn't die of cold during the summer, you would likely suffer intensely from hunger if you lack the specialized skills to find sustenance in these extraordinarily inhospitable places. Of course, you might say that people do live above the Arctic Circle, citing cities like Norilsk, Murmansk, and Vorkuta as evidence. The reality is that Eurasia is significantly warmer than North America at similar latitudes for several reasons I won't delve into here, as it's a complex topic. For example, ocean currents keep the port of Murmansk ice-free year-round, while Nome, Alaska, freezes every winter, despite being 5 degrees further south. Observe how the -10-degree isotherm closely follows the Russian coast before plunging far south in Canada. This was, incidentally, one of the reasons Europeans boldly ventured into the Canadian Arctic, only to find themselves trapped in the ice and discovering there was no summer. The ice covering the waters there never completely melts, and in summer, currents, winds, and the intricate interplay of various ice types cause floes to pile up into picturesque hummocks, rendering both water and land impassable. Passages through the ice open and close suddenly. Channels that appear so obvious on satellite-generated maps are, in reality, conditional. For several consecutive years, they can be blocked by ice, making it practically impossible to predict whether a strait will be open or closed. This is not merely a labyrinth. It's a labyrinth that shifts before your eyes and then behind you. You enter a corridor, and it can snap shut behind you, trapping you, virtually defenseless against the forces of nature, which at these latitudes are far more potent than human survival capabilities. I repeat, the indigenous inhabitants developed exceptional survival skills in these conditions, but the Europeans who arrived, even those who considered themselves experienced travelers and hardened warriors, quickly realized how much they had underestimated the Arctic. If all this were not enough, the Earth's core, which is not static, but constantly shifting in unpredictable ways with tons of molten metal sloshing within, creates magnetic flows, and the magnetic pole continuously drifts. This means your only Ariadne's thread in this labyrinth jumps like a laser dot. Compared to the dangers and complexities of these lands, which can drive one to madness, the tales of dense forests and phantom auroras are nothing. And all this in a situation of severe time constraints, as no one, not even the most ambitious and reckless sailors, attempted to travel there in winter, and the summer is short, meaning you have no time for mistakes. If winter catches you halfway, you're finished. The Inuit know how to build igloos, find fuel for fires in the snow, and hunt seals. But where do you hail from, esteemed traveler? From your comfortable armchair in Venice or Portugal? What are you doing here, good sir? For heaven's sake, people have sailed the northern waters of Canada since time immemorial, since the time of the Vikings, to be precise, and they managed to sail as far west and north as their luck and the capabilities of their ships allowed. But the first conscious recorded attempt to find the Northwest Passage was the expedition led by John Cabot in 1497. This Venetian, sponsored by the English crown, was the first European after the Vikings to reach North America. Columbus did not reach the islands of Central America. He may have touched Newfoundland. His son, Sebastian, possibly circumnavigated the north of Labrador, but that's not certain. This is merely the threshold of the Northwest Passage. Two Portuguese brothers, the Corte Real, attempted to venture deeper into Labrador, but perished one after another. A third brother tried to organize a rescue expedition, but the Portuguese king refused, deciding he had already lost enough men and ships. The English pirate Martin Frobisher made 3 voyages to those lands, reaching the eastern tip of Baffin Island. He brought back 18 tons of interesting ore with golden flecks, convinced it was gold, but it turned out to be mere pyrite, fool's gold. The classic Arctic adventure narrative invariably includes scurvy, starvation, clashes with the Inuit, the kidnapping of locals whom Europeans dragged back home to be displayed for money, and a significant problem of controlling one's own crew who attempted mutiny. The French, for a long time, clung to the hope that a sea route from the Atlantic to the Pacific lay much further south, in far more pleasant and civilized regions. Jacques Cartier, in 1535, sailed far up the St. Lawrence River, where he was eventually stopped by rapids, but he was convinced he had practically reached the Pacific Ocean and named the territory La Chine, China, and to this day, La Chine is a district of Montreal. All these early expeditions were not outright failures, even if they ended tragically. They were stages in the gradual exploration of the entire region, but then began the era of obsessive fixation. Further on, we encounter names that adorn major geographical features, islands, straits, and bays. Henry Hudson, sponsored first by the Muscovite and then by the Muscovy Company, attempted to find the shortest northern route to China for the English. Initially, he cleverly aimed east, as there was a foolish notion at the time that one could sail to China by bypassing Russia, but he was stopped by ice. Then he turned west and eventually reached a vast bay that we now call by his name. Like many navigators before and after him, Hudson made the mistake of deciding to winter there, because in the Arctic, your latitude is only one parameter. The strength and abundance of ice will depend on it. More southerly straits can become blocked by ice because they are shallower. It all ended with a mutiny. Captain Bylot, one of the mutineers of Hudson's crew, explored these territories. In 1616, they managed to reach the place now called Lancaster Sound, but the strait was blocked by ice, and they returned home with the disheartening news there was no westward passage. It was all blocked by ice. For 200 years, the English ceased their attempts to break through from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Scandinavians and French made several attempts, but, exhausted by scurvy, hunger, and cold, they returned home with great difficulty, and not all of them. However, in the following century, some progress was made in exploring the western reaches of the hypothetical passage. In 1728, Vitus Bering, a Russian naval officer of Danish origin, confirmed that Eurasia and America were separate continental masses, separated by the strait bearing his name. He opened the western door to the Northwest Passage. In 1774, the British Parliament announced a colossal prize for anyone who found the accursed passage, £20,000 sterling. ChatGPT calculated this to be around $9.5 million modern dollars. I cannot believe it. If there are specialists among you, please confirm or refute this. But then again, this sum was intended to cover your expedition expenses. Thus, Captain Cook and Vancouver attempted to navigate the Northwest Passage in reverse from the Pacific to the Atlantic, but also achieved no success apart from meticulously mapping the west coast of North America. They also became convinced that there was no chance of finding the Northwest Passage south of the Bering Strait. All hope rested on a passage through the labyrinth of Arctic ice. In the first half of the 19th century, the persistent English made significant breakthroughs in exploring the Northwest Passage from the Atlantic side. Captain Sir William Parry managed to penetrate furthest. This naval officer, who spent a significant portion of his career in northern latitudes, finally broke through Lancaster Sound, a point where several previous English expeditions had turned back. He decided to winter there, enduring temperatures as low as minus 57 degrees Celsius. They set up their own newspaper, The Arctic, and published a journal. Parry brought seeds of mustard and cress, planting them in his cabin as a way to combat scurvy. They returned home a year later, having lost only one man, and having reached the westernmost point of the Northwest Passage at that time. The entire direct waterway from Lancaster Sound to the Strait of Bering was charted. In 1820, The mood in Great Britain was such that the Northwest Passage was practically discovered. Only a small distance remained, perhaps 50 miles at most, separating the explored from the Pacific side. A final decisive push was needed, a conclusive expedition. The aging head of the Admiralty began searching for a worthy captain to lead this victorious charge and plant the British flag in the heart of the Arctic. This entire expedition was envisioned as a grand parade in honor of civilization. Captain Sir John Franklin was chosen to lead the expedition. The route was planned, and initially this honor was offered to Sir John Ross, who undoubtedly deserved it. But he was already an elderly man and politely declined, stating he had had his fill of the Arctic and wished to remain home. The second contender also refused, as did the third and fourth for political reasons, it seems. Consequently, a compromise candidate was placed at the head of the expedition. I hesitate to call Sir John Franklin unqualified. He was an experienced sailor, 59 years old, at sea since 17. This was his fourth expedition to high latitudes. He was also clearly a conscientious and humane man, forged in the crucible of Trafalgar, considerate of his crew. Nevertheless, several projects under his leadership had been nothing short of catastrophic. In a previous expedition to Hudson Bay, Franklin lost 11 out of 20 men, most dying of starvation, but there was also at least one murder. The survivors were forced to eat lichen and even attempted to eat their leather boots. This earned Franklin the nickname, the man who ate his boots. In recent years, he had been governor of Tasmania, and it was a complete failure. Ill-suited to the post, and, tragically, it ended for him. And everything the Franklins did in Tasmania followed a similar pattern. They began with the most humane and benevolent intentions, yet completely failed to understand the local realities, and all their efforts ultimately led to no positive outcome. In short, in the eyes of many contemporaries, Franklin was a specialist in good intentions, paving the road to hell, and his reputation was severely tarnished. It was his wife, Lady Jane, an exceptionally ambitious and energetic woman, who almost single-handedly pushed Franklin into this expedition. She very likely used her social connections to ensure Franklin's candidacy was even considered by the Admiralty. Thus, the captain was questionable, but everything else was superb. The ships, 2 naval vessels, reinforced and refitted for passage through ice, the Terror and the Erebus, Fear and Darkness, had recently completed a successful voyage to Antarctica. These were hybrid vessels, sailing ships equipped with steam engines salvaged from locomotives and featuring a state-of-the-art heating system. Provisions for 3 years were loaded into the holds, 5 if conserved, but the plan was for a 2-year voyage. They anticipated wintering and were excellently prepared for it. They even brought aboard 135 volumes of literature, because boredom during the polar night kills health faster than the cold. They also brought a monkey named Jocko for the crew's amusement. No one doubted that by 1847, the Terror and the Erebus would return home victorious, and the Northwest Passage would be fully discovered. The expedition set sail in May 1845. The Terror and the Erebus were last seen by whalers off Baffin Island in July 1845, and that was it. They never returned, not in 1847, not in 1848, never. The Arctic swallowed them whole and dissolved them within itself. The Admiralty was, in principle, prepared to wait for 2 years, but Lady Franklin, after 1847 passed, raised hell. She was an extraordinary character, a very active, temperamental, and self-assured woman, genuinely devoted to her husband, despite once refusing to wear her wedding ring, calling it the first link in the chain of marital bondage. She channeled her colossal energy into initiating searches for her husband and his companions. And despite experienced individuals assuring her there was no cause for alarm, that the expedition was well equipped and delays were likely, she persisted. By early 1848, the first rescue parties were dispatched. The Admiralty announced a reward of £10,000 sterling for any crew or crews of any nation who rendered assistance to the crews of the ships under the command of Sir John Franklin. Searches were conducted both on land and at sea, from both the Atlantic and Pacific sides, by professionals and bounty hunters alike. It quickly became apparent that the ice conditions in those years were exceptionally severe. James Clark Ross's ship ran into impenetrable ice, and McClintock's ship was trapped in the ice, and he himself barely escaped. Lady Franklin personally funded 7 expeditions, was nearly ruined, and fell out with her entire family. She wrote pleading letters for help not only to her Prime Minister, but also to the Tsar of Russia, the President of the United States, and the Emperor of France. By 1850, it was already a multinational crusade, and 11 ships were wandering the Arctic in search of Franklin. By estimates, no fewer than 200 people perished searching for Franklin's expedition of 124 men. But honestly, the true tragedy began with Franklin's own expedition. To solve the mystery of their disappearance, the expedition was meant to be a triumph of civilization over the forces of nature. But nature not only conquered, it didn't even deign to acknowledge it, merely a dismissive flick of the nose to proud Britain. The uncertainty was maddening. But when the first fragmented reports emerged of what might have happened, the entire world was plunged into shock. The pieces of truth that were found, unearthed, and bartered from the Inuit were so horrifying that neither Jane Franklin, nor the Admiralty, nor England itself were prepared to accept them. Here's how the mosaic pieces came together. In September 1846, the ships were trapped in ice near King William Island. They wintered there for the first time. But the following summer, the ice passages did not open. By the summer of the next year, Francis Crozier became captain. Franklin had apparently died from unknown causes, along with several other crew members. Soon, the living would envy the dead. The second winter was incomparably harder. Despite all the preparations, illness began to spread. Scurvy and something else, possibly poisoning from substandard canned goods or lead in the drinking water. Search parties sent out in all directions found no open water anywhere. It was bitterly cold, with not a living soul around, and the vast majority of the expedition members had never experienced anything like this in their lives. In the spring of 1848, the remaining 105 survivors loaded their rescue boats like sleds, abandoned the ships, and headed south, dragging all their belongings towards the mainland, towards the rivers and trading posts of the Hudson's Bay Company. Nomadic Inuit would encounter increasingly fewer people, emaciated. Most would die before reaching the mainland. The rest, hundreds of miles from the nearest habitation. In 1854, the explorer John Ray, conducting research for the Hudson's Bay Company, met Inuit who told him of white men who had died of starvation at the mouth of the Back River. Other Inuit showed Ray numerous items identified as belonging to Franklin and his men. Ray purchased several forks and silver knives from them, as well as metal buttons from their uniforms. In July 1854, John Ray sent a message to the Secretary of the Admiralty stating, "Sir, I have the honor to mention for the information of my Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty that during my journey this spring, I met with some Eskimo near Pelly Bay, from one of whom I learned that a party of white men had perished from want of food to the westward of the Great Fish River, which contains many waterfalls and rapids. Subsequently, additional information was obtained, and several articles were acquired that shed light on the fate of some, if not all, of the survivors of Sir John Franklin's lost party, a fate as terrible as the imagination can conceive. 4 winters ago, a group of about 30 white men was observed traveling south over the ice, dragging a boat. This was seen by Inuit hunting seals near the north shore of King William Island. None of the group could speak the Inuit language clearly, but from signs, the natives understood that their ships had been crushed by ice and that they were now heading to where they expected to find reindeer for hunting. Judging by their appearance, it was clear they were lacking provisions, and they bought a small seal from the natives. Later that season, but before the ice on the mainland broke up, the bodies of about 30 men were discovered. Some bodies were buried, likely the first victims of starvation. Some were found in tents, others under a boat that had been overturned to create shelter, and several lay scattered in different directions. The mutilated condition of many of the corpses and the contents of the cooking pots testify that our unfortunate countrymen were forced to resort to the ultimate measure, cannibalism as a means of prolonging their existence. John Ray, commander of the Arctic expedition of the Hudson's Bay Company, wrote his report solely for the Admiralty, but it found its way into the press. When Rae returned to England, he was almost torn apart. People were in shock and rage. They accused the Inuit of attacking Franklin's crew and causing their deaths because any civilized person knew that only savages could be cannibals, not Englishmen. Charles Dickens, a personal friend of Lady Jane Franklin, published several furious and impeccably reasoned articles in which he wrote, "It is impossible to form an estimate of the character of any race of savages by their respectful behavior towards a white man as long as he is strong. We assume that every savage is inherently greedy, treacherous, and cruel, and we still have to learn that a white man, lost, helpless, without a ship, apparently forgotten by his race, obviously starving, weak, frozen, helpless, dying, knows of the gentleness of the Eskimo's nature." It should be noted that at that time, amidst the grief and despair, an event occurred that, to some extent, put an end to Britain's obsession with the Northwest Passage. After one of the Franklin search expeditions, led by Robert McClure, entered the passage from the Pacific side and was trapped in ice for 2 years, McClure and his crew, who were by then starving themselves, eventually reached safety. They arrived by sledge over the ice from the ship of Sir Edward Belcher's expedition, which was searching for Franklin from the Atlantic side. As a result, McClure and his crew became the first people to traverse the entire Northwest Passage. They returned to England in 1854. McClure and his team were knighted. They were also awarded part of the prize money that had been promised them by the British Parliament, but it was decided that they did not deserve the full amount. So, returning to the painting with which we began, some art historians believe that on Millet's canvas, one of McClure's crew members is depicted in his retirement. At that time, Britain was gearing up for new endeavors, and people again expected victories and achievements, but the weight of the previous expedition's failures still pressed upon their shoulders. However, people like this old sailor refused to give up, refused to be morally defeated. They believed that England was capable of any feat and accomplishment, despite everything. However, the honor of the first complete crossing of the Northwest Passage by water, the first to fully navigate the Northwest Sea Passage, went to the Norwegian Roald Amundsen. He could have completed it in a year, but he decided to stop for a winter, and then another to fulfill a scientific program. He was in no hurry. He wasn't waiting for a monetary prize like Franklin's expedition. Instead of large armored ships, he chose a light fishing vessel with a shallow draft, and his crew consisted of only 6 men. He didn't intend to haul provisions for 5 years. He planned to live by hunting and fishing. To do this, he intended to use the local Inuit. He found himself in the very area where Franklin's expedition had disappeared. A whole Inuit village formed around them. The Norwegians learned the Inuit language, befriended them, and exchanged information, experience, goods, and food. They had conflicts, but overall, for 2 years, it was a productive alliance that allowed the white men to survive and thrive in the Arctic. They wore clothing made of reindeer skins, learned to make sleds that could traverse any ice in any weather, hunted seals and walruses, and also took readings on the location of the North Magnetic Pole, proving it was moving. After completing the Northwest Passage in 1906, Amundsen skied 800 kilometers to the town of Eagle, Alaska, from where he sent a telegram announcing his victory. More precisely, he first sent a telegram to his brother, informing him that he was alive and well, and then to the King of Norway. The new country, Norway, was celebrating, and for the entire 20th century, the Northwest Passage remained not entirely impassable, but practically economically meaningless. Firstly, the Panama Canal was built. Secondly, Amundsen was able to navigate the Northwest Passage solely thanks to the shallow draft of his boat. No serious cargo ship could have passed through those shallow straits. But in the 20th century, the situation changed. It seems we can now navigate the Northwest Passage because global warming is reducing the thickness of the ice. The Arctic Sea ice cover has decreased by almost 50% over the last 40 years. Global warming. Gentlemen, on the one hand, the Panama Canal is drying up, But on the other hand, regular navigation through the Northwest Passage has become possible. It's like the joke about Schrodinger's cat. My God, some lunatic is stuffing me into a box, but at least it's a rather cozy box. In closing, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that a goal cannot be achieved simply by increasing the number of attempts. Not everything can be achieved by brute force. One must learn from one's own and others' failures, draw conclusions, and forget pride when confronting nature. As Agent Dana Scully said, respect nature because nature has no respect for you. Dress appropriately when heading into the woods in winter, and don't be a hero. Skiing is great, but safety is paramount. Thank you for your attention. All the best. And until our next meeting, my friends. If you find yourself bored between Saturdays and would like to learn more interesting things about history, culture, and especially history without culture, you can subscribe to my blog on Boosty or Patreon. These two blogs are absolutely identical. I post the same content on both. Boosty accepts payments in Russian currency, while Patreon accepts various international credit cards. On these blogs, I publish fascinating stories with pictures almost every day. This is for the first subscription level. At the second level, you will also get access to additional short videos. Furthermore, if you dislike all the advertising that YouTube inserts into my videos, this is another reason to subscribe to the blogs, because I post Saturday videos without ads and 15 minutes earlier than on YouTube. This is for those who are particularly missing Saturdays. Another important bonus for subscribers is the ability to download my art books for free. I will also provide a link to the online store where you can buy them in the description below. And the last, but by no means least, reason to subscribe to my blog is that you thereby support this channel and give me the opportunity to devote all my working time to you. That's all for today. All the best, and see you soon.